we're starting with a review of making repeating patterns and also of the pen tool. Remember when we open Illustrator on these computers, it doesn't save our preferences, so we generally have to change from essentials to layout. And there it is. And remember, if we want to make a really precise textile design where we're going to use math, we kind of want to know what size our rectangle is. So to make a rectangle, this is going to be our background of our pattern. To make a rectangle that is a specific size, and it can be any size you want, you click once. And clicking once brings up this panel. So I'm on the rectangle tool and I just clicked once. And then you can type in a specific number, so probably not 20, maybe like 10 by 4. It'll do a real long one. Yeah. And then right now this is filled. You guys all paying attention? It's filled with white and it's got a black stroke on it. If we turned this into a pattern, it would have a grid because of the black stroke, so we just have to turn that off. To change the stroke, the little stroke square has to be on top of the fill square, right? The fill square is a solid one, and the stroke is the one with a hole in the middle. It's just the outline. So we click on it, it's on the top. You can also click on it over here on the left side. And then you can choose the little Ghostbusters symbol either there or the Ghostbusters symbol on the left side on the tool panel. And now it should have none. If it was selected and I did that, it would have none. There we go. And I'm going to choose a fill color, so bring the fill to the top. So now that I know how big it is, I would maybe want to draw motifs for it, or maybe I drew these motifs first and I can just bring them in, right? So I'm clicking and dragging to make smooth lines, to make these kind of bean-shaped guys. And you're clicking and dragging out handles, right? Those aren't the line that you're gonna get. This is the line, this curvy bit. And the handles, that you should always be dragging it in like a clockwise direction, I guess, if that's the way you started. And the handles will affect the back path too, right, when you adjust it, unless you hold Alt, and you can turn them into a corner this way, okay? So Alt or Option turns them into a corner. You can have some nice butt shapes. Right, so if I'm dragging this out, this is 1/2 of a heart, right? I'm going to hold Alt and put this up symmetrically on the other side across from that one. And holding Alt, I could make that into a corner as well. Okay. So if you're still having trouble with the pen tool, I did upload the worksheets that we did last week to Moodle, so I would recommend trying to go through those again because it is very important. Someone did mention to me, why don't we just use the pencil tool? And you can, especially for simple shapes like this. And if you bring it around to the beginning again, it'll do it. And it does actually smooth everything out for you. And you can adjust how much it smooths everything by double-clicking on the pencil tool over here. And then it's going to ask you, like, you want to edit the selected paths or not. Oh, well, that's actually for, I'm sorry, that's not to do with it. This is the smoothness of it. So I can change it down to way accurate. I'm going to hit OK and demonstrate with that. And it leaves a lot more of that, that texture into it, right? And then I can show, again, I can move it all the way up to smooth. And now when I create a shape, it'll make it all perfectly smooth with the least amount of anchor points possible. So that is kind of useful, and you can use that. The pen tool is faster in the end in my opinion, when you get used to it, and you can be very, very precise with it. Where the pencil tool, you have to hold this down the whole time. So if you wanted to make a very complicated shape, like clicking and holding the mouse this whole time can be problematic. I wonder what it'll do to this since I just have it set on smooth so much. Looks okay. So when you're designing, we should generally be trying to design more than one motif per pattern. Patterns with just one motif in them can be pretty boring. Even if all the motifs are these bean-shaped motifs, drawing new ones, drawing a few of them are going to give you some variety in your bean shapes that will add some interest. Right? My star patterns that I was making before were pretty boring because all those stars were exactly the same. You don't have any interest in them. Okay, so then we can start arranging these beautiful shapes on the board. Right? And so far, we've always cut them and then moved them, right? So we select the background and the shape, and we use the divide tool or the Pathfinder tools, right? Window, Pathfinder, this guy. And we use divide.
I think it's beautiful.
Thank you. Beans. You guys, there's actually, since we were just talking about Andean textiles, there's a Peruvian bean pattern. Because beans were super important to, maybe it's not Peruvian? Oh, well, I'll find it. I have a picture of it in a book somewhere. It's all just beans. It's very beautiful. Anyway, right, so previously we would have copied and pasted the background, right? Edit, paste in front keeps it like right stacked on top of each other. So there are two there. And we would select them and choose divide and then ungroup. Oh, right, I haven't turned on my right click. To do that, we go down to the bottom and go to mouse. This is just a review of how to change it to have a right click button, a secondary button. But now I can right click and ungroup. And then we would slide this across, or we would go to edit, transform, move, or maybe it's right click, transform, move, and we would tell it to move to the left 10 inches exactly, because that's the size of our rectangle. Instead of doing that, so I'm going to actually hit Command Z, I just wanted to talk about one other option, which is if you didn't want to cut these yet, like maybe you weren't sure that the placement of them was exactly right, okay, we can move this whole shape over there first and then cut them afterwards. So here, we have these placed kind of okay, but maybe we want to be really sure that none of them are overlapping when we are repeating. So I'm going to copy this guy, so edit, copy, and then edit, paste in front so it's in exactly the same place, right? But there are two there now, Command Z to go backwards. And we are going to move this heart over, so right click, transform, move, and since we're doing it this way, instead of like trying to line up the edges after we've cut it, we can tell it to move exactly -10 inches. And now, if we grouped both of these, right-click, group, when we click on them, they'll move together, and we know that they're 10 inches apart, so as long as they're still only going off of this edge, they're perfectly lined up with each other. So we can adjust like this, okay? So I'm going to do the same thing for these guys. Edit, copy, edit, paste in front, right-click, transform, move, and shoot, I think I did it. I think this is 2, I think it's 2 inches or 4 inches, maybe 4. So I'm going to move it vertically 4 inches. And I think it's actually negative 4 inches since it's moving up. Yeah. And now we could group these, right? And if we're grouping the ones across from each other, then those are essentially the same shape. And when we move them, they're still going to be perfectly lined up. So I can still have the luxury of adjusting some of these guys. Same thing for this one, right click, oh sorry, edit copy. Edit paste in front, right click, transform, move, and this time we want to go positive 3 or 4 inches down, because my original square was 10 by 4, and this is just a straight repeat that I'm doing. And now that I have all my pieces kind of laid out, right, I could group these if I wanted to, and I could actually still, like, I could grab this guy and kind of fill in these holes with him if I wanted to, and making him bigger, right, using different sizes of motifs, even if they're the same motifs, can add a lot of visual interest. I can kind of fill in some of these holes here, make him a different color. Maybe rotate these and make them smaller, and then you can always grab the white selection tool and actually make them into different motifs right here. As long as we haven't copied and pasted them yet, that's fine. So let's see how this looks. We could actually select this all and then go to edit, object pattern make, and we could actually edit this to get it to the right size, but then isolating the repeat later on can be a little bit tricky. So to make this look as like that seamless tile that we've made before, we just have to choose, yeah, we need 2 of these. So edit copy, edit paste in front, there we go. And we can select actually the background and all of the edge pieces that touch the edge. Oops. Oh, right, because some of them are grouped. Okay. And then choose divide. And it splits all of those pieces on the background line. Right click ungroup. We can delete our background shape that's all carved up, right? If we moved it out of the side, we would see it was all carved. And then we can just delete all of these outside shapes. And now we have a perfect repeating pattern tile. And we can select it all. Oops. And it's always good to check before we go to edit define pattern, because any of these like off pieces you've probably noticed will make the edit define pattern work a little harder. Objects, pattern, make. Oops, I didn't have it selected. And there it is. Right, if we want to see it without the outside tiles dimmed, we can always undim the copies. Right, and that's nice. And if we want to see it without the blue line, we can turn off show tile edge and get like a real feel for it. You're always going to be able to see your artboard in the background, though. That's just part of it. You can't really work on your artboard in the same way because this is kind of a layer that's projected above it, which you guys have experienced because when we hit done, it just saves over here and it doesn't save on your screen, or on your board. So what we're going to do is learn how to print today. And I want you guys to print for next week. And I kind of wanted to go down to the print lab and go over it. But this is how you prep it. So I'm actually going to move all of this out of the way. or make a new artboard. We haven't talked about artboards, so I guess I'll do that. This is the Artboard tool down in the lower left-hand corner. If you're familiar with Photoshop, it looks a little bit like the crop tool. It's like a crosshairs, and then it's got a page coming off of it. So if we choose the Artboard tool, it gives us this little crosshairs on the page, on the background. And we can actually click and drag a new artboard. I'm going to put my Pathfinder tools right there in case I need it later. That's where it is. But that artboard we made, because I clicked and dragged it, it might not be that exactly 11 by 14 that we're required to print at, so I'm going to trash it. So the way that you delete artboards is you can select them by clicking on them with the Artboard tool, and then go up to the Properties panel and choose Delete. And these are like different pages, so we can choose to print, one of these or the other, or all three, in a PDF format, whatever we wanted, however many artboards we had. So instead of that, I'm going to go from the Artboard tool to this new symbol. So instead of dragging it out, I'm just going to hit New, and it's going to make an artboard that's exactly the size that I want. And even over here, it says 11 by 14. So I'm actually going to make 2 new artboards, because for each print we print out, we actually want to print it out twice for every print. So how do we get our pattern on our artboard? We drag a rectangle out that's the size or bigger than the whole artboard. And then we fill it with our new swatch that we made. And there it is. These black lines, they're concerning, but I'm pretty sure they aren't really there. I don't know. Maybe that one is. If I double click on this, on the pattern, I can edit it again, so I could zoom in and kind of see what's going on here. But it doesn't seem like moving this up. Yeah, the line is still there. So I think it's an imaginary line that Illustrator has added, which I know can be hard to determine. And I'm pretty sure if we printed these, then those lines wouldn't show up because they're that fine. Okay, so the 2 types of pattern, or the 2 prints that we want to print for every print are actual size and a size where we can see the whole layout of the repeat. Okay, so let's say I want this to be actually a giant print. I want these beans to be just like huge on the body, very ridiculously huge. I can adjust the size of it to be the actual size that I want by right-clicking and going to Transform and Scale. We've touched on those transformation tools. My favorite way to adjust numbers in Illustrator and Photoshop is actually to click in and then use my center scroll button. So you click on them and then you can adjust up and down by scrolling. I'm going to check preview. So right now, this is adjusting the whole object, and it's actually not adjusting the size of the pattern. Does that make sense? The pattern's staying the same size. That's because this box, Transform Patterns, is not checked. So here I'm going to put this back to 100. And now if I check Transform Patterns and click in here, it's adjusting the whole shape of the pattern and the object back to 100. The way we really want to do it, where we leave the object, this rectangle, exactly that 11 by 14 size that we want it to be, we uncheck Transform Objects and we just have Transform Patterns checked. Only Transform Patterns. And now when we click in, we can see it in all different scales. So let's say this is the scale I want it to be in. That's fine. I can print it in that scale and we would get a great idea of what it looks like. Or how dramatic it would be anyway. But we can't really tell what the repeat pattern is, like what kind of structure you used, or does your pattern flow very well. So I'm going to click and drag out another box, and it's automatically filling with the same properties as the last rectangle I made. But this time I want to show at least 3 repeats on it. That's generally how much we need. So I'm going to go to right-click, transform scale, and again I'm going to make sure that just transform patterns is selected, and I'm going to lower this down to, oh my god, back to 100%. Lower it so it's quite small. So something like that, where we can see how it repeats from left to right and top to bottom. So this is kind of a long, thin one, right? I made it 10 by 4, so it's like kind of horizontally. So I have to make it pretty small in order to get like a whole 2 repeats on there. Okay, we can hit. Okay. So these would be kind of the 2 that I would print out. Now, if I just go to File, Print right now, it's going to print all 3 pages, right? And I can see it on this preview. And we don't want it to print this first page. It doesn't. That first page doesn't matter. To use the just last 2 artboards, we can click on Range and just type 2 to 3, and then it'll only print the last 2 artboards, and it's even giving us a preview here. Same thing, and this is maybe the better way to do it. If you go to File, Save, or File, Save As, yeah, actually, it would probably be File, Save As. File, Save As, in order to save it as a JPEG, right? So if we're going to change it from the format of Adobe Illustrator, oops, right. In Illustrator, you can't save things as JPEGs from the Save As button. So I'm going to take the opportunity to save this as, just to demonstrate Save As can only be saving Illustrator files, okay? You only use Save As for the .ai files that allow you to edit it again later, right? So we'll call this bean pattern. Okay, to save it as a JPEG, we have to go to File, Export. I would take note of that. File, Export, Export As. And here we can choose between PNG, JPEGs, TIFFs. So we'll save it as a JPEG. But again, if we save this just as a JPEG without checking Use Artboards, it would save this whole page, like everything that's on the page, which isn't very useful. So instead we want to check Use Artboards, and we're gonna have it just do Artboard 2 to 3, and choose Export. Now for printing in this JPEG situation, we want to make sure that we save these as maximum quality files and with the resolution of 300 pixels per inch. Remember, Illustrator doesn't work with pixels, but as soon as you go to save it and turn it into a JPEG file, it has to use pixels to make it. It has to save them as pixels to be a JPEG. So we're telling it we want it to be the highest possible resolution. And then I actually, in general, always choose no anti-aliasing, none. It can cause problems to include anti-aliasing. And we can hit OK. And just as an example, I'm also going to go to File, Export, Export As, and I'm going to uncheck Use Artboards and save that one. And then I'm going to show you what both of them did. In my Documents folder. So these are the 2 I saved just with that Use Artboards button checked. And this is the one I saved with it unchecked, right? So it printed all of the artboards, which is totally useless. Or it didn't print them, it tried to save them as that. So then it would be fairly easy to print from here I find that the Illustrator print function is overly complicated, and I prefer to save things as JPEGs to print them. That's just me. Well, I guess we'll print this guy here. He's gonna ask me a question. There it is. So you wouldn't be printing them out here, though. You would be printing them out in the shop, in the, what is that space called downstairs?
The lab.
The lab, yeah.
On like the third floor.
Is that where it is? Yeah, it's a big lab. I've only been there once. I'm sorry. There's lots of floors. I am going. I think I'm gonna. All right, I'm gonna stop this recording there.